Yahuah is always willing to reveal his truth. The problem is not that he won't reveal his truth. The problem is that oftentimes man is not willing to hear. What we saw as we began in the book of Shemot chapter 12 is that in the book of Shemot chapter 12 there are two sets of instructions given. Okay? There are two sets of instructions given. There is a set of instruction that governs the very first Passover. Okay? There's a set of instructions that governs the very first Passover. And then there is a set of instruction that governs the remembrance of the Passover. Okay? So, as we began our study, we find that there's actually, contrary to what a whole lot of synagogues and places teach, there's actually two different sets of instructions right there in Shemot, Exodus chapter 12. As time goes on, what we're doing is we're shedding layers, and so we're growing from esteem to esteem, and he continues to reveal himself to us more and more. And as he reveals himself to us more and more, we see, our eyes are open to the many lies that we have inherited. And that's exactly what the poem is speaking about. The poem that our coach just shared with us, that's exactly what it is speaking about. And the sad thing is that a lot of people are trapped in these lies because you cannot tell them for one moment that they have inherited any lies. And you know, I continue to use that example, for example, and even last night I used the example of myself. It has to do with this very study that we're getting into, you know, but I used the example of myself last night, how based upon what I hear repeated over and over again, something as simple as the phrase, the third hour of the day, the third hour of the day. Because I hear that continually said over and over again, then I began to think that, you know, it's a possibility that Yahusha, that when he was hung on a tree, that it was at night time that he was hung on a tree, because the scripture says it was the third hour of the day. And I began to ponder that, and so, but, you know, as I begin to ponder something, you might hear me speak it out, but I'm just letting you know this is what I'm pondering, that there is a possibility. But I have a responsibility to go back and search it out. So when that thought came to mind as I was pondering on that phrase, the third hour of the day, so as I began to ponder that phrase, let me just put here, right here, I'm using this, and I'm using myself as an example, okay? This phrase, the third hour of the day. Okay, the third hour of the day. I began to ponder on that phrase, the third hour of the day, and as I began to ponder on it, in my pondering, I'm saying, well, the scripture says that he was hung on the tree at the third hour of the day. And I began to think, you know, you see, when we think about the words of Yahuah, we've got to think about what Yahuah is saying from Yahuah's perspective. Okay, when we think about the words of Yahuah, we've got to think about what Yahuah is saying from Yahuah's perspective. I'll give you an example. This morning, my wife had went into a room where there's this gentleman there that is teaching that basically that there is no Messiah. Okay, and it's not the first time. My wife had gone to that room before. I don't think she just saw the room and went into it. She didn't willfully go there this morning, like knowing that that was the same room. But she went back into the room again, and so there he was with an audience, and he was teaching, you know, that popular doctrine that's going around, that there is no Mashiach, that there is no Yahusha, that Yahusha is just another name for Jesus, and that it's all pagan, and you know, how he was brought forth and all of this stuff, you know, it's all comes out of pagan belief. So he was talking about the word for virgin in Hebrew, which is the word, what is the word again there? Alma, if I remember correctly, is the word that is used. And he was saying that that word really doesn't mean virgin. You know, in essence, what he's saying is that there is no word in Hebrew for virgin. The word is Alma, and it simply means young woman. Okay, so this is what he is saying. And so I was having a discussion with my wife. My wife had questions, and I was having a discussion with her. And what I was trying to communicate to her is that when we look at the scriptures, we have got to view the scriptures from Yahuah's perspective. Because my wife was saying, well, you know, a young woman doesn't necessarily mean that she is a virgin. Simply because if the word means young woman, it doesn't mean that she necessarily is a virgin. And he's using that to say the whole virgin birth is a conspiracy by the Roman Catholic and so on and so forth. That's a study that is necessary for us to get into in Yahuah's time. But he's basically saying that it is all a fraud. Okay, this whole thing about a Messiah, it's paganism. Okay, and so my wife was saying, well, you know, simply because the word mean young woman, it's not necessarily speaking to a virgin. You know, and to remind my wife again, when we look at the scriptures, we have to look at the scriptures from Yahuah's perspective. Okay, when Yahuah speaks of a young woman, or when he speaks to us concerning the character of an Alma, he is not speaking to, I'm going to use the words that he would use. He is speaking with a certain expectation for his people. Yahuah does not expect for young women to run around whoring, you see. But instead he expects for us to wait for marriage. Okay? He expects for us to wait for marriage. So when he speaks of a young woman, he's not speaking to a whore or of a whore. He is speaking of someone pure. Okay? And so when we look at the scriptures, we have to look at it from Yahuah's perspective. If we fail to look at it from Yahuah's perspective, then we will simply say that, well, Yahuah could be speaking about a young woman who had ran all over the place before having a child, but now here's a young woman bringing forth a child. That's not the perspective that Yahuah speaks from. Yahuah speaks from the perspective of righteousness. Okay? Yahuah speaks from the perspective of righteousness. So when Yahuah speaks of a young woman, he does not speak of a whore, but he speaks of someone that is pure. That's his perspective. That's the perspective that he is coming from. He is coming from a perspective of righteousness. And my point is that when we fail to look at the scriptures from Yahuah's perspective, then we're always going to err in what we say. So when I think about this phrase, the third hour of the day, I think about it from Yahuah's perspective of what marks the beginning of the day. He said, if the scripture actually says the third hour of the day, then the first hour of the day is the first hour from the beginning of the day. The second hour of the day is the second hour from the beginning of the day. And the third hour is the third hour from the beginning of the day. So as I began to think about that, and thinking that I read that in the book, I began to think that, oh, so the third hour of the day would actually be dark, would be nighttime. And that's when he was hung. That thought came to me because I was reflecting on that phrase, the third hour of the day. But then, as always, I said, you know what, I've got to look into that to see if it is really so. So I decided, you know, let me test this. Let me look into it. Well, when I went back to the text, I realized that though I was thinking that the text says the third hour of the day, and even though I've heard it said a whole lot that he was hung on the tree on the third hour of the day, the scriptures doesn't say that. The text does not say the third hour of the day. The text says the third hour. And because the text is given to us in Greek, when you look at it in the Greek, it actually is letting you know the third hour of daylight, meaning the third hour from sunrise. Not the third hour of the day, but the third hour from sunrise. So I brought that up to say that with myself, you see, Yahuah is continuing to shed things off of us, but even as he shed things from us, there are certain things that will seek to hang on, you see. There are certain things that will seek to leech on to us, but Yahuah is so faithful, he is so merciful, he is so kind that he will not leave us in that state of ignorance. Yes, see, like a key mark just put there, and it was the third hour, and they impaled him. They hung him, you see. And so it didn't say the third hour of the day. It said it was the third hour. The third hour from sunrise. The third hour of the day would be the third hour from sunset, because that's when the day begins. But this was the third hour of daylight. It's now been 3 hours since the sun has been shining. And that's when they hung him on the tree. Okay, so I use that as an example that sometimes, even though we get something, yet we can take a couple steps and then we get hung up in something else. You see, the things that we continue to hear continue to influence us in ways that we don't even realize that they're influence us, because even though the text doesn't have the day in it, I was thinking that the text actually says the third hour of the day. Where did that thinking come from? That thinking come from a lie that I inherited. Yes, it sounds simple, but it's a lie, because the scriptures doesn't say it. And if you leave the third hour of the day in it, and if you begin to think from Yahuwah's perspective concerning when a day begins, then it's going to change your thought concerning what is written. You see. And so Yahuah was faithful in that he brought me back and said, no, I didn't say the third hour of the day. I said the third hour. And when you look at it from in the Greek, it lets you know the third hour of daylight, meaning the third hour from sunrise.
I was thinking about that.
Okay? Yes, the earth couldn't become dark and shock everyone if it was already dark. Certainly, Aki. Now, I'll tell you what I thought in that regards. I'll tell you exactly how I thought in that regards. Because, see, I grew up in Jamaica. I lived in the country where, for a time anyway, I lived in a country where we didn't have street lights. There was no lights around. Okay? And, you know, my mom was on here with me a couple weeks ago. And she was listening in, and she was telling me that it's a full moon and how how bright the place was. You know, she was telling me, you know, how beautiful it was. Because you see, when you're in total darkness, you see stars that you don't know exist, and the moon creates a light that is amazing. You know, if you're not accustomed to it, you know, you leave here and go to Jamaica and go someplace secluded, or any place on the earth where they don't have all this artificial light. The moon provides a magnificent light. So, and I know also from growing up in Jamaica that when there was no moon, it was extremely dark. I mean, so dark in some places that you can't see a foot in front of you. It's thick darkness, you know. And so I was thinking, well, you know, maybe it's that the moon had absolutely become totally dark. Because, you see, by the time Yahusha was hung on the tree, this would have been also the day of the full moon. So I was thinking that Well, that's what it was. The moon became absolutely dark, and so it was just absolute darkness around them, you know. So, but I was wrong. But what got me thinking about all that? Me putting the word day in there. Me just going along with something that is always said about the word day, the third hour of the day. But the word day is not in there. You see, the third hour. When you put the word day in there, and if you see the word day, if the word day was written in there, then you would have to think of a day from Yahuwah's perspective rather than from a Western perspective. When we think about the word day from a Western perspective, it's totally different than the word day from Yahuwah's perspective. So I was thinking that the word day is in the text, and I'm now thinking of the word day from, or seeking to think of the word day from Yahuwah's perspective. And I was off because the word day just wasn't in there. Even though it's something that you hear said often, it's just not in the text. Okay? So I use that as an example of how we can inherit lies, and how lies impact us and affect us. And until we are willing to, number one, evaluate what we speak and what we believe, and Yahuwah reveals to us. Oftentimes, Yahuwah is always willing to reveal his truth. The problem is not that he won't reveal his truth. The problem is that oftentimes man is not willing to hear, you see. And that goes back to what Arakut shared in her poem, okay? So, you know, I use that concerning myself as an example. And the other thing that I like to ask people is about how many animals Noah took on the ark. You know, that's also another great example, because though it's written, what we say and what is written is totally contradictory, but yet we absolutely believe that what we say is what is written. And then we'll go and we read what is written and still don't see what is written. Why? Because we have inherited lies, and we have been influenced by the lies that we have inherited. So it's important for us to ask Yahuwah to continue to tear down every idolatry, every fallacy, and anything that would hinder us from seeing his word for what it actually says. And as he continues to do that, then his truth will be revealed, you know, and then we have to have a willingness to receive what is being revealed. And so we're dealing with a subject of Passover. And I've had this discussion on Facebook concerning Passover long before I brought it to this room. And I've found it to be a very difficult subject to discuss. Upset. And so it has been a very difficult subject to discuss with anybody, to get anybody to look at it, other than what we inherited from turning from Christianity and turning to Judaism. It is very difficult to have a discussion on it. That's been my experience, especially through Facebook. Okay, so we're going back to the beginning, and what we're doing with Passover is that we're going to walk through the scriptures, through Torah and the prophets, and then we're going to ultimately get to the renewed covenant, Yahusha. Okay, but it's a slow process, and I like to go slow. Some people get bored. Some people think, oh, he's just boring. But you know, I don't believe. You see, I know in church, you go to church and you hear the pastors, and you know, they're the heavenly hype men. You know, they can get people jumping and shouting and screaming and stomping, and excitement fills the air. But then at the end of all the entertainment, yes, at the end of all the entertainment, you ask the people there for some substance. Ask what was said, what was shared, and hardly ever can anybody tell you anything. They might get a few catchphrases that they can share with you, but no real substance. And so I believe that if what we desire is Yahuwah's word and his truth, then we have to be patient, and we've got to walk through his word, not just hop, skip, and play hopscotch through it and cherry pick it, but we've got to walk through it contextually in order to get what he's really saying. And so, you know, when we go into whatever study we go into, or anytime we open the scriptures, we often find ourselves here for hours, because I believe in taking my time and walking through it. So I hope I'm not boring to anyone. But that's just my approach, you know. And you know, I believe it's necessary for me to take my time. So yes, indeed. So, you know, it's going to take some time to get to the last portion, which is the renewed covenant, Passover, the Passover of Yahusha. But I believe that we're starting out here in the book of Shammut, Exodus chapter 12, and we're going to work our way forward from there. Yep, so we're beginning here in Shammut chapter 12. Now, as we begin our study today, we're going to be going over some of the things we discussed last time. And what we saw in the scriptures, we're going to go over this. What we saw as we began in the book of Shammut chapter 12 is that in the book of Shammut chapter 12, there are two sets of instructions given. Okay? There are two sets of instructions given. There is a set of instruction that governs the very first Passover. Okay, there's a set of instructions that governs the very first Passover. And then there is a set of instruction that governs the remembrance of the Passover. Okay, so as we began our study, we find that there's actually, contrary to what a whole lot of synagogues and places teach, there's actually two different sets of instructions right there in Shammut, Exodus chapter 12. One dealing with the very first Passover, and another set of instruction that governs the remembrance of the Passover. I want to talk about that word remember in a moment, but before we go any further, just to look ahead a little bit, I'd like to have just an open trivia here in the room, you know, because there are people in this room who probably already know this stuff. You see, there's nothing new under the sun. If I come to you proclaiming something new, then don't believe me. Nothing that I say should be new. If what I'm speaking from is Yahuwah's word, then whatever I'm speaking should not just be something that have only been revealed to me, you see, but it should be something that somebody else, being led by the Ruach, bears witness to. Okay, so anything that I'm sharing is nothing new to me. I didn't make it up. It's what's written. Okay? And so if it's something absolutely new, then don't buy it. Don't believe me. So what I am going to say, with what I'm going to ask now, is just an open trivia. Anybody in the room can answer. I'd appreciate your input. Okay? But this is a little open trivia as we begin. What was different about the Passover of Yahusha and the Passovers that came before it and after it? What was different about the Passover of Yahusha and the Passovers that came before it and after it? Anyone in the room? What was different? Okay, he was the lamb. Yes, he became the lamb. Oh, and that reminded me of something that I've got to make clear. I said something before, and I didn't say it clearly enough. I'm gonna say it. Well, okay. No. You see, okay. Let me just say this. Yeah, the lamb was prophetic of Yahusha, but while Yahusha fulfilled the lamb, he was the fulfillment of the prophetic picture of the lamb, yet he did not do away with the lamb. That's important, okay? He did not do away with the lamb. Yahusha, you see, Christianity teaches that Yahusha did away with the sacrifices, and that's absolutely false. Yahusha did not do away with the sacrifices. He was the fulfillment of these prophetic pictures, yet the prophetic pictures continue. The difference now is that the purpose of the pictures, the reason why the pictures exist now is different than why they existed before. Okay? The reason why the pictures exist now is different than why they existed before. But him becoming the fulfillment does not mean that he did away with it. And I said that before, you know, I'd said before in the room, and I realized that I didn't make myself clear enough. I said that you will not find any scriptures that says that Yahusha is the fulfillment of the Lamb. And what I meant when I say that was that you will not find any scriptures that say that he did away with the sacrifices, like the sacrifice of the Lamb and so on. You will not find any scriptures that says that, because the sacrifices have not been done away with. The sacrifices, they are right now on pause because we are not in the place where he has chosen to put his name, where the sacrifices are to be. We are scattered. We are in Babel. He did not do away with the sacrifice. He did not fulfill in the sense of doing away with the sacrifices. The scriptures lets us know in the book of Yeshayahu, in the book of Zachariah, in the book of Ezekiel, Yahazakal, that the sacrifices will continue. Okay? So yes, he became an atoning sacrifice. Right? He became an atoning sacrifice. He redeemed us. Now, the sacrifices have not been done away with. But you see, what the sacrifices did before Yahusha showed up to redeem us was the sacrifices pointed forward to him. Now, they did. They pointed forward to him. Now, the sacrifices continue and will continue, in that they no longer point forward, but they point back. They point back. So you see, Abraham, according to the scriptures, you read this when you read the book of Hebrews, it says that those who came before us, Abraham and Hanuk and all of these men, they were looking forward to the promise, yet they never realized the promise. They did not see the promise. Okay? We, on the other hand, we're looking backward at the promise fulfilled. Now, as we look backward at the promise fulfilled, you see, when you look forward to something, it creates a kind of like a good, if it's something good, you have this good kind of anxiety. You see, you're anxious. They were anxious. Yes, an anticipation. So they had this great anticipation. And when you're anticipating something, then you're making sure that you are positioning yourself to receive that thing. Okay? So those before us, they had an anticipation, and they were positioning themselves to receive the thing that they anticipated. Okay? Now we, on the other hand, we are looking backwards. We still have an anticipation, but as we look forward for our anticipation, the way we look, we're not looking forward, we're looking back at what he had done. Okay? That is why that's why Yahuah tells us to remember. What does remember mean? What does remember mean? Okay? Remember, the word remember is made up of two words. The word remember is made up of two words. You have re, which means back. Okay? Rewind, go back. Okay? You have member. Member. So, what is a member? The very word member speaks of a root. A root. The very word member. If, for example, we have a number of us here in this room, and you can say, you know, you're a member of the assembly here today. Okay? That means that you are a part of something bigger. You are a part of a bigger root. Okay? You are a part of a greater assembly. We are rejoining rejoining or connecting back to a root, rejoining to the root, okay, to the original. Okay, so remember, it's taking a member and putting it back with its root. Okay, taking one member and putting it back with the body of members. So when Yahuah say, for example, remember my Shabbat, he's talking about going back and rejoining yourself with what he gave you at the beginning. Okay, how do I remember Shabbat? Well, go back to what he said at the beginning. What is my Shabbat all about? How do I remember? Rejoin myself with what he did when he gave me Shabbat. Revisit what he gave me at the very beginning. And that's how I remember Shabbat. I'm rejoining myself with Shabbat in its original form. And that is the way I keep Shabbat pure and active and alive the way that Yahuah intend. I've got to remember with it. I've got to rejoin with it. Okay? So, and he tells us to remember these things. He is telling us to rejoin with what was original. Put yourself back with it. And that's the only way that you can carry it forward. If you do not reconnect with what is original, then moving forward, you're bringing in something different. And he don't want us to bring in anything different. He wants us to simply take what has always been there and move it forward. And in order to do that, you have got to rejoin yourself with it. Remember. Go back and rejoin. Go back and become a member with this so that you can move forward with it. If you don't rejoin with it, then what you're moving forward with will be something different. And so, his feast and his Moedim are a remembrance to us. They are a remembrance to us. And as we continue in our study, we're going to see where he tells us explicitly that concerning his feast and his Moedim, that we are not to change anything concerning them. Okay, so we'll see that where he wrote that explicitly. Okay, and so how we remember them is by rejoining with them in order to move forward with them. Okay, so the question is, what was different about the Passover of Yahusha? Praise Yahuah, praise Yahuah. What was different about the Passover of Yahusha and Passovers before it and Passovers after it? Let me see if anybody had answered. I know that I've been running my mouth quite a bit, so let me back up just a little bit. Okay, yes, I see one there from Shamuraya. I meant Yahusha fulfilled the prophecy about his coming. He certainly did, yes. Okay, that's one. That's one. Okay, type of shadow of what is to come. That's true too. Well, yeah, it really. The only thing that suffered death was not the Torah or his word, but the consequences of breaking his Torah. For those who would accept his redemption, those consequences no longer rule over us. Okay, we have bread and wine. Actually, you know, those things actually existed. The bread and the wine and the foot washing, those things existed from the first Passovers, and even before the actual Passovers were you know, when we have in the scriptures prophetic pictures of the Passover, as with Abraham and other people in the scriptures, they actually did those things. A prophetic symbol of what would happen, what would come to be. We come to know as Passover. They were doing them already even before they were laid out for us in the way that they came to be laid out, you know, later on in Shamut. They were already doing them. So those were a part of it. And so that was just a continuation. Now, Shamuraya had pointed out some things there that were in fact very Yes, and Passover is our protection, certainly. Could it be that after Yahusha came and left, he identified to the people that they were in the next stages? Not really the answer that I was looking for, but I appreciate all the input and everything that is being posted. Did not Apostle Shaul and the assembly still do the bread and wine after Yahusha's death? Yes, they did. Yes, they did. They could see the Father's timeline, and not only did they do the bread and wine, they did the sacrifices. Okay, they did the sacrifices. That's out of what came that whole argument about what we should eat and what we shouldn't eat, and what meat we should eat and what meat we shouldn't eat, because they didn't. What a lot of people miss is the fact that the book of 1 Corinthians, his writing had everything to do with the keeping of Passover. The entire book was about Passover, 1 Corinthians. The entire letter was about Passover. He was writing to the people at Corinth, to the Yahudim, to Yasharal, the scattered people, the 10 tribes that were scattered at Corinth. He was writing to them about Passover. He was trying to bring them back to the remembrance. Okay? And so everything that he was writing to them was about preparation for Passover, about being pure in order to keep Passover. And then out of that conversation, he addressed a conversation that was going on among the people, which is about meat. Because you see, the pagans, they were offering the animals to their idols. And because of that, there were people of Yasharal who started saying, well, you know what, because they're offering the goat or the cow or the this or the that to their idols, then we're not going to partake in those things. So even when it came time for Passover, they didn't want to partake in those things. You see? You know, if you read in Corinthians, even for example in chapter 11, you see, it was Christianity that made Passover into this little ritual where you drink a little bit of grape juice and these these wafers, okay? It was Christianity that gave us that idea. But read Corinthians chapter 11, 1 Corinthians chapter 11, and ask yourself the question, can somebody get full of a little bit of grape juice and some crackers? No, they can't. You see? But what the people were doing in Corinth, when they came together for the Passover, it was a meal, and it was the Passover meal. The sacrifice was still in place. And so when they came together, they forgot what the meal was supposed to be all about. And you have people like that today. When Passover come, when they say they're celebrating Passover, they'll come, if you're not careful, they might come with 10 bottles of wine and a stockpile of food. And it's nothing more than, I could dare call it another Christmas tradition. You see, we're a people that we so love traditions that if we're not careful, we profane the things of Yah because out of our desire for empty traditions. And that's what they were doing in Corinth. You see, so when they came together, it was more like a party. Yes, nothing more than a party. You see, and so he warned them. He said, listen, maybe you should eat at home first before you come and partake. You see? Maybe you should first eat at home before you partake. Okay? But it was in preparation for Passover. That's what he was really talking to them about. Okay? Them being in the right frame of mind when it comes to the Passover. So you're living in sin. You have this guy in your midst, and he is laying with his father's wife. And you're not saying anything about it, but then when it comes time for Passover, he participates in Passover. You see? And he's trying to correct them before the next Passover comes. You see? He's trying to correct them. Yeah, well, and you know, that's the thing. Well, you see, and we can blame Christianity for that, because Christianity has taken everything literal and turned it spiritual. You know, even though the literal speaks of the spiritual, but he didn't tell us to forsake the literal, because the physical is very important. You see, the physical creates a picture that we can really relate to. You know? Yes, it was dealing with preparing them, but not only 11, but the entire letter. Because you see, it was just one letter that Shaul had written to the people. He didn't put chapters and verses in there. It's one long letter. So where we have chapter 1, chapter 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, and 12, it wasn't like that. It was just one letter that he wrote to them. And when you write a letter, if I write you a letter, I'm writing that letter with a purpose. The letter has a beginning, it has a middle, and it has a end. It has an end. And it sums up my thought. You see? So it was one continuous thought throughout this letter that he was writing. And the whole thing was, he was telling them that before the next Passover comes around, you need to get rid of the leaven out of your life. You need to get rid of the leaven out of your thinking. You need to get rid of the plague that's in your heart, so that you would be able to participate with a pure heart. That was his message to them. You see? That was the message to them. And the whole point was in preparation to partake in the Passover. Because Passover ain't just a meal. Passover is important. And the importance of Passover for us today, what it's supposed to be, is to remind us of the sacrifice. Is to remind us of the price that was paid. Okay? So before Yahusha came, the purpose of the feast was to remind them of the sacrifice that will be paid. And once he came, the purpose of the Passover is to remind us of the price that was paid. Do not take that price lightly. Do not take that price lightly. Okay, should we be doing the Passover today? Now? Well, again, no, and we're going to get to that in the scriptures, because we are in Babel. Okay, and we're going to get to the scriptures on that. I know that that's a highly, could use the words provocative, divisive, could use a bunch of words to describe what I just said there. Yes, volatile, controversial, could use all those words. But you know what? The controversy is really, if there's any controversy concerning the word of Yahuah, the controversy is not in the word. The controversy is in us. You see? And so what it requires then is for us to be patient enough to really go through the word patiently and deliberately. And it's not going to happen overnight. It's something that takes time, you see, because it requires context. And so that's what we hope to go through, to look at as we continue in this study, you know. But I know it's okay. But again, what we've got to remember, you see, a lot of us, I know for me, let me speak of myself. When I came out of the church, what I looked to was Judaism. Okay? That's what I looked to. I looked to Judaism. Okay? And the problem with Judaism is that it looks a whole lot like lawfulness. And that's what makes it dangerous. Judaism is Christianity in another skirt, but Judaism is perhaps even more dangerous than just raw Christianity. Okay? Judaism, I would say, is more dangerous than just raw Christianity. You know why? Because it has a form of lawfulness. Christianity is outright lawless. So when you've been exposed to the fact that, you know what, I ought to live by the law, then when you look at Christianity, you say, oh, but that is telling me outrightly that the law is done away with. So it's easy for me to say, oh, that's no good. Let me turn away from that. Satan doesn't just give up. When he fails in one area, he don't give up. You know, when I was in church, I remember this song by Kirk Franklin that he used to sing. I don't remember the name of the song. I just remember this one thing about the song. At the beginning of the song, he said there's somebody there talking, you know, and at the beginning of the song it's two people talking, and so this guy is giving advice to somebody else, and he said, if at first you don't succeed, give up and try something else. Okay, if at first you don't succeed, just give up and try something else. Okay, that was his advice, you know, that was his $1 million advice. If at first you don't succeed, give up and try something else. Well, you see, that's exactly what Shaitan does. If at first he does not succeed, he give that up and he tries something else. So he comes at you from another direction. And every time he comes at you, he gets better, even though he don't get wiser. His tricks look better, but they're no more wiser. You see. Yes, and we could go on and on with that list of what they're not, you know. Yahuah says, indeed, it, yes, a form of righteousness. Indeed, it's so much stuff done away with in Christianity. For instance, they say the command. Yes, absolutely. Absolutely, Aki. Or Yahuah. I'm thinking it's Aki, I'm not sure, but absolutely. Remember that Yahuah deceived them. Yes, indeed. Yes, absolutely, Shamuraya. And that's the thing. And that's the thing. That's exactly it, Shamuraya. And that's what we're trying to. We've got to trying to get our people to see that it can be another matter. You know, I've been told off by our people that are in Judaism. I mean, laid out, told off, because I speak against Judaism. You know, I speak against their falsehood. I speak against their lies. You know, and I've been told off by our people who are defending it. And that's just ignorance. But you see, that goes back to the poem that Oracle read to us today. You see, some people, the reason why they're stuck in a lie is because they don't want to hear nothing else. They're comfortable with where they are. You see, so we must recognize that we have inherited lies and recognize the methods of deception. Recognize the methods of deception. Because if you don't recognize the methods, then oftentimes you will just fall for it again. Okay, so you realize, oh, well, and I was lied to there. Well, exactly how did he get me to believe that? Until you know he got you to believe that, then he'll be able to use the same trick on you all over again. You see, so we must recognize the methods of deception. One of the method is Judaism and its wrong teachings. A conqueror of deception says, some of our people moved to Israel. Yes, indeed. Now that they are in the land, can they keep Passover there? Well, you see, Aki, according to the scriptures, the temple has to be rebuilt. And according to the scriptures, no man will rebuild the temple. You see, the synagogue of Shaitan, the Jews will rebuild a temple. But that is the bogus temple. That's the deception. And that's what's going to cause even more people to think that they are the people. You see, they are mimickers. Anti-Mashiach, absolutely. So they're going to build their temple. But that's not the, because you see, the temple that we will worship in, the temple that worship will return to, will not be made by the hands of man, the scriptures tells us. And Torah tells us that all throughout. That's why Yahuah says that even the altar, concerning the altar of the temple, that the stones were not to be, no tools were to be used on the stones. So the temple that we will, that worship will be restored to, where the sacrifices will be restored, it will not be made by the hands of man. Okay? Judaism will rebuild a temple. But in the city, the new Yerushalayim, Yahuwah's Hekal, his dwelling place, will be coming down in that city also. Okay? And so, but men will fall for the lies, and they'll rebuild a temple, but it will not be the temple of Yahuwah, and people will fall for that. They were instructed to keep the feast in wilderness by Yah. We have not been instructed to keep it in this land. Yes, certainly, certainly, in the wilderness, absolutely. And at that time, why was that? Why was that? I'm going to point this out. You see, For us to keep the feast, an hekal must be present. And in the wilderness, did they have the hekal with them in the wilderness? Did they have the hekal with them in the wilderness? Did they have the temple with them in the wilderness? Oh, yes, they did, Akut. They did. They had, you see, the temple or the hekal is what's called the tabernacle. Okay? So, yes, they had the tabernacle, which is the hekal. The tabernacle was the dwelling place of Yahuah. It was a temporary dwelling place. Okay? And so they had the hekal. Now, notice it was a place of Yahuah. Okay? And we're going to deal with the matter of where some say, well, our body is now is temple, so we can worship wherever. We're going to look at that from every aspect, from every perspective. We're going to look at that. But again, it takes time as we go into the study, okay? So the question was, what was the difference between the Passover of Yahusha and the Passovers before it and after it? Okay, and it was this. It was this. You see, when Yahusha kept Passover, Yahusha kept 2 Passovers back to back. Okay? Yahusha kept 2 Passovers back to back. None has done that before him. None has done it after him. None will do it after him. Yahusha kept 2 Passovers back to back. And he had to keep 2 Passovers back to back because he had to fulfill the prophetic message of Passover. So he fulfilled the first Passover. We're going to look at this in details as we continue in our study. I'm just bringing this up now, okay? It's something for us to, so you understand where I'm coming from and where we're going. So Yahusha kept 2 Passovers and he kept them back to back. Okay, when Yahusha, the first Passover that Yahusha kept, certainly, Aki, we will get to it, but it takes a little time. I beg for your patience, okay? But I'm going to say some things that will probably jag your memory here a little bit. The first Passover that Yahusha kept, he kept it in the way that they kept the very first Passover. Remember, I started off by saying that as we read, and we're going to go to the text in the book of Shamut, Exodus chapter 12. As you read the book of Exodus chapter 12, you see that there are 2 different sets of instructions in the book of Exodus chapter 12 concerning Passover. The first set of instructions was for the actual Passover, with the people coming out of Mitzrayim, which was a prophetic picture of us coming out of sin, out of bondage to sin. Okay, so there was one set of instructions for the actual Passover. And then there's another set of instructions in the book of Shamut chapter 12 for a remembrance of the Passover. And that is where the name of Passover was changed from Passover to the Feast of Unleavened Bread. Okay, now, so there are 2 different sets of instructions. Well, when Yahusha came, he kept the first Passover exactly as it was kept by the people as they were preparing to come out of Mitzrayim. So, in the first set of instruction concerning the Passover, and the Passover that was kept by the people as they prepared to come out of Mitzrayim, the Passover, the lamb was to be brought in on the 10th day, kept to the 14th day, and then killed on the 14th day. And in the very first Passover, not only was the lamb killed on the 14th day, it was also eaten on the 14th day, on that night, as we read. And we're going to look at that as we go. We're going to pick up now. We're going to be going to the book of Shamut. We went over this last time, but we're going to go over it again. And so they ate it that night. It tells us in the book of Shamut. Okay, Well, we're going to go to the text, Aki. Bear with me for a second. We're going to walk through it again. And please follow along closely. Okay? Because there are two different sets of instructions in there. The problem is that sometimes we get the two sets of instructions mixed up. Okay? So we're going to look at it. So I'm saying this now. And so, we're going to look at it. So if I'm wrong, the scriptures will prove what I'm saying wrong. Okay? So in the book, what I'm saying to you is that in Shemot chapter 12, you will see that he says that they were to kill the Passover on the 14th day, and they were to eat it that night. And that night, the death messenger would pass over them. And the blood had to be in place before he does. So on the very first Passover, what I'm saying is the scripture tells us, and if it's wrong, then we will see, because we're going to the text very shortly. On the very first Passover, they were instructed to kill the lamb on the 14th day, and they were to eat it on that night, and the messenger, the death messenger, would pass over on that night, and the blood had to be over the doors and stuff. Okay, that's the very first, that's the first Passover. Okay, and they were to eat it in haste. Okay, they were to eat it with their loins girded, so on and so forth. Now there's a second set of instructions. Now Yahusha fulfilled that perfectly, because Yahusha, remember that when they came and got him, when they came and got Yahusha, what was the situation? What were the events that took place before they came and got him? Yahusha, if anybody could answer. If you need the mic, I'll release the mic to you so you can share. But what was the events that took place prior to them coming to take Yahusha, okay, for trial? He finished the Passover meal, correct? He had finished the Passover meal. But do you realize that in the scriptures, it also tells us that when they took him before Pilate, that the Sanhedrin would not go into the hall because it was preparation day. They were preparing for the Passover. But so wait. So why did Yahusha keep the Passover then? And they were saying it was preparation day. We're going to look at that. We're going to see why that is, because